Grief sometimes presents itself as a debt you can never fully pay, but for me it was the opposite. A payment made in full for a life I knew nothing about. The simple, unnerving truth was carved into cold granite. I had laid a man to rest, funded his eternal silence, only to realize I had paid for a ghost. Our narrator, Clara, 50s, lives a solitary, structured life as a small-town accountant. 6 months prior, she generously paid for the funeral and burial of an unnamed man who died rescuing her from a near-fatal car accident, a man she knew only for the final heroic 30 seconds of his life. The setting is the quiet, manicured local cemetery. Clara's emotional tone is one of profound, indebted solemnity, which immediately curdles into confusion and intense scrutiny upon seeing the man's completed headstone. The air in the cemetery was sharp, smelling of wet autumn leaves and cut stone. It was a bleak, quiet afternoon 6 months after the event that had cleaved my life in two. I had come to see the installed headstone, the final permanent marker for the man who saved my life, the man who remained stubbornly unidentified. The grave was located on a quiet slope, shaded by an old cedar tree. I approached slowly, my heart heavy with a mixture of immense gratitude and persistent, unresolved grief. I had commissioned a simple, unadorned stone, a clean slab of gray granite etched only with the date of his death, October 12th, and a blank space reserved for his name, a promise I intended to fill if he was ever identified. I rounded the final corner of the cedar's shadow. The stone stood there, massive and stark against the damp earth. It was beautiful, simple, and exactly the size I had requested. But as my eyes focused on the engraved surface, a jolt of ice-cold alarm went through me. The inscription was not the one I had approved. The simple, clean layout was gone, replaced by 3 stark lines of deeply cut text. The stonecutter, usually meticulous and insistent on final approval, had unilaterally changed the epitaph. The inscription read, "Here lies a kind stranger. Died saving a life. October 12." The words were deeply set, permanent, and utterly anonymous. The phrase "kind stranger" was a deliberate, almost protective declaration, erasing any possibility of a later identification. It felt like a final, unchallengeable edit to his history. I reached out and touched the cold, rough granite, tracing the deep V-cuts of the lettering. The action was deliberate, undeniable, and it directly violated my clear instructions and the contract we had signed. The shock quickly hardened into suspicion. The question of why was immediate and chilling. Who intervened to select this anonymous epitaph? It had to be someone who knew his true identity, someone who wanted to permanently suppress the ability to trace him through the public record of the cemetery. The inscription was a seal. Why did the stone cutter comply without her permission? A professional stone cutter, especially one handling a high-cost commission, would never unilaterally change the epitaph without a compelling reason, usually a legal directive or an overwhelming financial incentive. This suggested the intervention was powerful, well-funded, or both. The stone was no longer a memorial to a hero. It was a coded message. The generic title, "Kind Stranger," was a highly effective cover story designed to satisfy public curiosity, while simultaneously protecting a secret. The grave was not just a burial site. It was a vault. The realization transformed the quiet cemetery into the threshold of an active, deliberate deception. My search for the hero's identity had clearly been intercepted by someone determined to ensure the identity of the kind stranger remained permanently sealed beneath the cold granite. I rubbed the back of my glove over the deeply carved letters. The anonymity was absolute, intentional, and hostile. The man who died saving me had a life he was actively hiding, and now a powerful entity was continuing that concealment after his death. I knew my next step was clear. I had to confront the stone cutter. He held the immediate, tangible answer to who paid for the new inscription, and who forced the final, anonymous edit to the stranger's history. The stone was cold, but the mystery was hot. The stonecutter's workshop was a cavern of noise and dust, smelling sharply of wet stone and metallic grit. I found Mr. Harper in the back, a venerable but laconic man whose movements were slow and deliberate, matching the time scale of the granite he cut. He looked up, recognition and a flicker of deep discomfort immediately crossing his face. He knew why I was there. I showed him the photograph of the headstone, the words, "Here lies a kind stranger," starkly visible. I bypassed polite questioning, my voice firm. "This is not the inscription I approved, Mr. Harper. I paid for a blank space. Who ordered this change?" Harper immediately became evasive, avoiding my eye, focusing instead on a piece of rough granite on his workbench. He rubbed his large, calloused thumb across the stone, a gesture of intense discomfort. He claimed the situation was unusual, entirely irregular. He finally broke his silence, admitting the intervention was external. He claimed he received an anonymous, finalized order to use the specified inscription. The order was delivered with a large, hefty cash payment that, he confessed, more than doubled the amount of my original commission. The money was the key to his compliance. A man of his trade, facing the financial realities of small-town business, had succumbed to the overwhelming incentive. He then described the man who paid. "A shadow in a dark coat," Harper recalled, his voice a low rumble. "Came in late, didn't want the lights on. He never spoke my name or his own. He smelled faintly of old leather and cold rain." Harper admitted the man's demeanor was one of cold, absolute authority. There was no negotiation, only instruction. The stranger provided the exact wording and the cash, making it clear that the order was not to be questioned or altered. The transaction was a command. The immediate, absolute financial incentive, combined with the man's cold authority, explained why Harper complied without my permission. The stonecutter was paid handsomely to forget the true source of the order and to carve the final, anonymous epitaph. The purpose of the intervention was chillingly clear. The stranger clearly wanted the deceased to remain eternally unnamed, ensuring no future search, mine or anyone else's, could use the public record of the cemetery to trace the man's identity. The epitaph was not a tribute. It was a final active effort to erase the man's identity. I thanked Harper, leaving him to the dust and the silence of his secret. I now knew two things. The stranger had money and, more critically, had immediate knowledge of my intentions to leave the namespace blank. This suggests the stranger was tracking me or the stonecutter from the moment I commissioned the original memorial. The man who died saving my life was not a simple accident victim. He was a man with a secret so volatile that a powerful, anonymous agent was actively sealing his identity beneath cold granite, using money and coercion. The anonymous epitaph was the first visible move in a high-stakes game of concealment. The next step was to find the source of the man in the dark coat. The stonecutter's confession, the anonymous cash payment and the shadow in the dark coat confirmed that the identity of the kind stranger was actively being suppressed. My next step was to confront the source of the man's physical disposal, the funeral home director. I needed to know the actual process used to bury an unknown man and confirm the basis for the police's vague description. The funeral home was hushed, smelling faintly of lilies and sterile cleanliness. The director, a pale, reserved man named Mr. Evans, met me in a quiet parlor. His professional detachment was strained. He seemed weary of the case that had already caused so much quiet disturbance. I asked him directly about the identification process for the man killed on October 12th. I explained my efforts to commission the headstone and the strange intervention. Mr. Evans sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet room. He revealed a series of chilling facts that fundamentally undermined the official record. No formal identification. Due to the severe nature of the accident injuries and the complete lack of next of kin appearing to claim the body, the man was never formally identified by fingerprints or dental records. The resources weren't allocated for an intensive search on a John Doe, whose death was ruled an accident. Vague police description. The burial proceeded based solely on a brief, vague police description: height, weight, and presumed age. This description was adequate only for bureaucratic closure, not for accurate identification. No viewing. Mr. Evans leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a man confessing a professional sin. He quietly admitted that the coffin was never opened for viewing, even by him. The body arrived from the medical examiner's office, was placed directly into the casket, and was sealed immediately for burial. The horrifying truth was now undeniable and absolute. The town did not bury a vaguely identified hero. They buried a complete unknown. The sealed casket contained an individual whose true identity was known only to the shadow in the dark coat. The silence around him was not the silence of respectful grief. It was the absolute silence of an active cover-up. The police were satisfied with a generic description. The funeral home facilitated a closed casket disposal, and the anonymous benefactor paid to ensure the anonymity was permanent. The realization sent a fresh wave of alarm through me. The man I owed my life to was legally a ghost, a fact that had been facilitated by every pillar of the small community's procedure. His lack of identification was not an oversight. It was the core of the conspiracy. I thanked Mr. Evans, the pallor on his face matching the cold certainty in my heart. I left the funeral home knowing that the conspiracy was deeper than a single headstone edit. The entire process, the quick burial, the sealed coffin, the anonymous epitaph, was designed to ensure that the man who died saving my life would never, under any circumstances, be found or named. The grave was not just a vault. It was the final destination for an identity that was actively, powerfully being destroyed. My search was no longer for his name, but for the reason he had to vanish. The anonymity was his protection. The realization that the town had buried a complete unknown, a man whose identity was actively being suppressed, turned my attention to the single brief moment of tangible evidence I had encountered, the wallet. In the immediate chaos following the accident, I had seen it, touched it, before it vanished back into the hands of the authorities. I revisited the scene in my memory. The sterile white exhaustion of the hospital emergency room. The police had been efficient, impersonal. I clearly recalled Detective Price, the lead investigator, a man with a thick mustache and an air of weary finality. He had held a small, distinctive dark leather wallet, the only personal item recovered from the man's person, and for a fleeting second, he had placed it in my hand before quickly reclaiming it. The leather felt cold and smooth. I had been too shocked, too focused on survival to process the detail then. Now, that memory was the last, most vulnerable thread of the conspiracy. I decided to confront the source of the cover-up directly, Detective Price. I located Detective Price at the precinct station. The atmosphere was fluorescent, busy, and entirely procedural. I presented my concerns about the headstone and the suppressed identity. Price listened with an air of professional condescension, his arms crossed over his chest. I steered the conversation to the wallet. "You handed me his wallet at the hospital, Detective. What was inside it?" A simple driver's license would have identified him. Price was immediately frustratingly unhelpful. He claimed the procedure was standard for unidentified remains. He stated flatly that the wallet contained nothing of consequence. No ID, no credit cards, no cash. I pressed. "No, ma'am," he repeated, his gaze cold. "Just a few receipts, some lint. Nothing that could definitively identify him. It was documented and destroyed per procedure after the investigation concluded." His statement was absurd. A man involved in a serious incident, traveling, carrying nothing but lint? The claim that the wallet was destroyed per procedure was a bureaucratic lie, designed to seal the record. Price's aggressive dismissal and the speed with which he declared the wallet of no consequence only reinforced my certainty that the wallet held the key to the entire mystery. He was lying. The wallet contained the truth, and the police were actively protecting it from public view. The realization was chilling. The identity of the kind stranger was not unknown to the authorities. It was classified. The police were not merely incompetent. They were complicit in the cover-up, working in tandem with the anonymous benefactor. The destruction of the wallet wasn't protocol. It was evidence suppression. I left the precinct, the glare of the streetlights sharp on the pavement. I had hit a bureaucratic wall, but the wall had cracked. The wallet, the simple leather object, was the missing link between the anonymous civilian life and the secret classified existence. The only way to move forward was to assume the wallet contained something unique. A clue so subtle, so non-obvious, that only someone looking for a specific secret would understand it. I had to find a way to verify the contents of the wallet, or find a witness who saw it before it was officially destroyed. The police were now part of the conspiracy. The aggressive lie of Detective Price regarding the wallet confirmed my deepest suspicions. The police were complicit. To break through the bureaucratic wall, I had to use my own professional tools. As an accountant with experience navigating and cross-referencing municipal records, I knew that even the tightest cover-up leaves a digital seam. I dedicated the following days to accessing the town's archived accident report data, focusing not on the public summary, but on the raw digital files stored in the municipal server backup. Working from my home office, the atmosphere was sterile and intense. The glow of the screen was my only company. I cross-referenced the unique identification numbers of the October 12th accident, the date of the kind stranger's death, against the server's backup logs. The breakthrough came late one night. I found the original digital folder containing the accident report, the witness statements, and the initial forensic photography taken at the scene. I ran a metadata analysis on the final official police report document. The result was immediate and chilling. The report had been digitally altered 2 days after the accident. The initial file had been opened, modified, and saved under the final version. The modification was targeted, precise, and entirely intentional. I isolated the changes and focused on the original digital file, containing the unedited forensic photography. Most of the images were standard, wreckage, highway markings, debris. But tucked away in the sequence, taken before the body was moved, was a single high-resolution, sharp image of the stranger's hand. The photo was close-up, focusing on the ring finger area, perhaps searching for wedding band evidence. There was no ring. But the image revealed something far more significant, something crucial for identification. Across the back of the man's knuckles, running diagonally from the forefinger toward the wrist, was a deep, distinctive scar. It was old, white, and unmistakable, the mark of a serious past injury, likely a deep cut or a burn. The scar was a crucial identifying mark, unique as a fingerprint. I compared the raw image to the text of the final police report. The final report contained the generic physical description, height, weight, age, but made no mention whatsoever of the distinctive scar. In fact, the photograph itself was absent from the final digital file delivered to the insurance company and the public record. Someone in authority had actively covered up the man's identity. The initial file, which included the sharp image of the scar, was created at the scene. The final report, signed by Detective Price, omitted the scar photo and description entirely. 2 days later, the digital alteration confirmed that the police department, under the direction of an external or internal entity, had deliberately destroyed the only viable physical evidence for identifying the deceased. The conspiracy was now undeniable. The wallet held the proof of his civilian life. The scar held the proof of his physical history. Both were suppressed. The man who saved my life was actively being disappeared, and the local authorities were the mechanism of the cover-up. I printed the high-resolution image of the scarred hand. The deep white line across the knuckles was now my only tangible link to the kind stranger. It was a signature of a past life, a life of conflict, risk, or labor, that someone wanted permanently buried. The time for investigation was over. The time for action had begun. I had to assume the scar was the key to his professional or private history. The next step was to bypass the local cover-up and search for the meaning of the scar outside of the town's compromised jurisdiction. The man's identity was not in a police file. It was in the story behind that wound. The police cover-up and the falsified report confirmed the active suppression of the kind stranger's identity. My only physical clue was the image of his hand, the deep, distinctive scar across the knuckles. The scar was too pronounced, too precise to be a random accident. I considered the possibility that the mark was deliberate, a coded identifier worn openly. To decipher this unique signature, I needed an expert who understood the language of the body's markings outside of a medical context. I drove to the edge of town, to the only establishment that specialized in deliberate body modification, the local tattoo parlor. The space was dimly lit, smelling strongly of disinfectant, incense, and fresh ink. A world far removed from the sterile paperwork of my accounting life. The owner, a burly woman with intricate work covering her arms, was initially wary. I presented the printed, high-resolution photo of the scarred hand, keeping my request simple and direct. I need to know if you recognize this kind of scarring, or what it signifies. The tattoo artist took the photo, holding it beneath a bright, adjustable lamp. Her professional curiosity immediately overtook her initial wariness. She didn't look at the face. She looked only at the knuckles and the pattern of the wound. She instantly recognized the nature of the scar. "That's not an accident," she stated, her voice low and firm. "That's a deliberate brand. An aggressive form of self-mutilation done for recognition or initiation." She explained that the method of the scarring, the uniform depth and angle, was specific. It was often associated with military or highly organized underground groups where permanent, undeniable membership markers were required. The scar wasn't a wound from a fight. It was a badge of belonging. The man who died saving me was not a simple vagrant or a casual traveler. He was a highly trained operative with a history of conflict and strict adherence to a coded group identity. The artist then leaned closer, adjusting the light. Her finger traced the base of the man's wrist, just beneath where the main scar ended. "Look here," she murmured, pointing with a long metal tool. "Faint, but it's there." Near the wrist, partially obscured and almost entirely faded, was a faint bluish-green smudge. It was the ghost of a mark, the residue of a removed or degraded tattoo. The artist instantly recognized the pigment. "That's residue from a specific chemically-based tattoo ink I used years ago, back when I was working out of state. It degrades poorly and leaves this distinctive blue-green stain. It's rare now. It hasn't been commercially used in years." The specific ink residue suggested that the man's body had held another, more formal identifiable mark. A tattoo that was either old or, more chillingly, was recently, professionally removed to erase his identity. The tattoo artist was confirming the man's history was deliberately complex and fiercely guarded. I retrieved the photograph, the paper feeling hot in my hand. The scar was a brand. The smudge was a ghost. The police and the stonecutter were paid to suppress his identity. But the body itself was a living, coded history. The deceased was a highly trained operative who had been actively scrubbing his identity, removing a tattoo, carrying a clean wallet, before the final fatal incident. The conspiracy was not just a cover-up. It was the end stage of an elaborate exfiltration. The next step was clear. I had to assume the scar and the missing tattoo were related to the same secretive organization. I needed to find out the significance of that rare tattoo ink and the groups associated with aggressive branded scarring. The answer lay outside the small-town secrets and deep within the world of specialized, underground organizations. The realization that the kind stranger was a highly trained operative with a scrubbed identity, evidenced by the scar and the faded tattoo residue, demanded a return to the source of his vulnerability, the accident site. The wallet, dismissed and destroyed by Detective Price, remained the central, missing piece of the civilian life he had abandoned. The highway shoulder where the accident occurred was a place of painful memory, yet I felt strangely drawn to the location. I drove out to the site, a quiet, unremarkable stretch of road now scarred by new asphalt and the persistent quiet of the surrounding woods. I was operating on pure instinct, believing that the destructive force of the accident might have missed something small, something subtle, something the police cleanup had overlooked. I spent hours sifting through the roadside dirt and debris, using a small trowel and a methodical grid search, ignoring the passing traffic. The air was cold, smelling of stale exhaust and damp earth. I was looking for anything non-organic, anything out of place. My persistence was finally rewarded. Tucked deep beneath a clump of weeds near the concrete barrier the car had impacted, I found it. A small damp scrap of dark leather. It was thick, stiff, and clearly ripped away during the impact. A piece of the stranger's wallet. The leather was cold, rough, and stained with earth. I carefully wiped away the grime. The size of the scrap suggested it was from an inner fold, and its construction was highly customized. It contained a perfectly stitched, tiny inner pocket, a compartment designed not for easy access, but for secure, absolute concealment. The stitch work was professional, designed to disappear into the lining of the wallet, making the compartment entirely invisible to a casual search. This was the final critical piece of evidence that Detective Price claimed was nothing of consequence. My hands, numb with cold and anticipation, worked the tiny seam of the pocket. Inside, rolled impossibly tight into a brittle cylinder no wider than a matchstick, was a single slip of paper. It was thin, fragile, and damp. I carefully unrolled the slip beneath the pale afternoon sun. The paper was clean, unmarked save for a single stark entry. A long sequence of digits and letters. It was a Swiss bank account number. The discovery instantly ripped the kind stranger out of the realm of simple civilian life and placed him squarely in the world of high-stakes, international finance and likely covert operations. The tattoo residue and the scar indicated a professional past. The Swiss bank account number indicated a secured financial exit strategy. The anonymous benefactor who paid the stonecutter and suppressed the wallet wasn't covering up a vagrant. They were covering up a major financial asset. I secured the tiny slip of paper. The entire timeline, the anonymous identity, the professional training, the suppressed wallet, the custom scarring, was now linked to a specific high-value asset. The man was living under deep cover, and the Swiss account was his parachute, his guaranteed escape route or payment method. The time for quiet investigation was over. I had the key to his financial identity. The next step was to bypass the local cover-up and engage the international system, using the account number to find out who was funding the kind stranger and what powerful entity wanted him permanently erased. The silence around the grave was immense, but the truth was now written in a Swiss vault. The Swiss bank account number, recovered from the scrap of leather, was the single, most potent piece of evidence. I couldn't risk approaching the bank directly. The anonymous forces that silenced the police would undoubtedly monitor the account. I had to bypass the local cover-up by engaging my own professional network in the international financial system. I discreetly contacted Mr. Kessel, a trusted international finance consultant based in Zurich, a connection I had cultivated over years of high-level accounting work. I framed the inquiry as an urgent due diligence matter involving a confidential high-net-worth estate. The request was simple: confirm the account's validity and determine its last activity. The wait for Kessel's response was agonizing, measured by the time difference and the slow, deliberate pace of Swiss banking secrecy. When the encrypted call finally came, the atmosphere was thick with professional caution. Kessel was brief and entirely technical. He confirmed the account is real and, more significantly, extremely well-funded, holding a multi-million-dollar balance. The account was registered not under a personal name, but under a coded trust, a structure designed for anonymity and complexity, confirming the account belonged to a professional operative. Crucially, the account had been inactive for several years, confirming the kind stranger's long-term choice to live under deep cover, relying on the funds only as a last resort. Kessel then delivered the final, most chilling piece of information. The final communication from the account holder was a single, cryptic, prearranged message sent precisely 48 hours before the accident. The message was 3 simple, cold words: debt paid. The transfer was not a withdrawal or a deposit. It was a coded signal from the account holder to the trust's administrator. The money was clearly a contingency, a final mechanism of the operative's past life. The message instantly transformed the entire narrative. The kind stranger didn't just die. He completed a mission. Debt paid suggested the money was not just a safety net, but a final payment settled just before a high-risk operation. The operation that ultimately led to his death, saving my life. I thanked Kessel, the cold, distant echo of the Swiss banking system snapping shut. The truth was now a profound moral certainty. The man who saved me was an operative who died on a mission. The debt was paid, the money was released, and 48 hours later, his identity was destroyed, first by the staged police report, and then by the anonymous headstone. The search was no longer for a name, but for the nature of the debt and the entity that received the final payment. The kind stranger died free of obligation, choosing to spend his final, conscious moments saving a life, his true mission complete. I had to find the organization that held the key to that debt. The encrypted call came late, well after midnight. The number was blocked, the line filled with static. It was Detective Price, his voice thin and tight, entirely stripped of its former bureaucratic condescension. My persistence, the digging into the scar, the wallet, and the metadata, had shaken his wall of complicity. He agreed to a covert meeting in a deserted park lot, late at night. The investigation had moved from files to shadows. Price looked diminished, older, consumed by guilt and fear. He avoided my gaze, speaking in rapid, low tones, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He confirmed my darkest suspicions immediately, confessing that the cover-up was real, and his role was simple: obedience purchased by a vast sum of money. He revealed the identity of the person who orchestrated the anonymity, the shadow in the dark coat. He was a professional, ma'am, Price admitted, his voice barely a whisper. He arrived on the scene fast, faster than any official. He showed papers identification that, well, you don't question. He was an operative. Price confessed the chilling reality of the transaction. The operative quickly assessed the scene and the risk of exposure. He paid Price an enormous bribe, a sum far exceeding Price's annual salary, demanding that the burial be completely anonymous. The money was the key, the irresistible financial force that purchased the necessary police cooperation to falsify the report, destroy the wallet, and suppress the crucial photo of the scar. Price's aggressive dismissal, and the digital alteration of the report, were the direct consequence of that silent, powerful transaction. He told me his life, the stranger's life, was worth more than my career, Price confessed, the shame heavy in his voice. He didn't threaten. He just laid the money on the table. And I took it. The operative confirmed the kind stranger's true identity and status, answering the question posed by the Swiss account and the suppressed scar. The deceased was a highly placed intelligence asset, a man who had been faking his own death years ago and was living under deep cover. The operative explained that the accident was a final tragic failure of his deep cover. The scar, the clean wallet, the lack of ID. It was all part of a long-term operational profile designed to withstand close scrutiny. The tragedy of his death was immense. He was only exposed because in a moment of crisis, he heroically broke cover to save Clara. His instinctual act of heroism, the saving a life etched onto the granite, was the single action that violated his entire operational profile and cost him his anonymity and his life. I listened to Price's confession, the truth settling with a profound aching sorrow. The kind stranger had succeeded in faking his death, had secured his exit via the Swiss trust, and had been living a free, hidden life. His death was not an accident, it was a sacrifice. A fatal choice between maintaining his cover and maintaining his humanity. I thanked Price not for his honesty but for his confirmation. I walked away from the deserted lot, the weight of the enormous secret heavy in the night air. The man who saved me was free of debt, free of obligation, and ultimately free from the chase. He died a hero, choosing to spend his final conscious moments honoring his humanity over his operational discipline. The immense, tragic truth of his selfless sacrifice was now my profound inheritance. The interrogation was over. Detective Price, exhausted and broken by his own shame, finally revealed the ultimate purpose behind the enormous bribe and the elaborate cover-up. The entire complex deception, from the falsified report to the anonymous granite, was designed to protect a legacy far larger than one man. Price confirmed that the operative's sole purpose was to ensure the asset's death remained anonymous. The reason was chillingly clear: to prevent his true identity from compromising the highly secret network he belonged to. The network was professional, deeply hidden, and international. If the death of one high-ranking, presumed dead asset was publicly confirmed, it would force the entire organization to scramble, exposing others to unnecessary risk. The kind stranger's anonymity was a matter of global operational security. The headstone, with its peculiar sanctioned wording, was revealed to be a brilliant double-edged sword. Public face, tribute. The phrase "died saving a life" satisfied the general public's need for closure and served as a genuine tribute to his kindness and sacrifice. Coded confirmation security. The phrase "here lies a kind stranger" was the true coded message. It was a confirmation to the right people, the network administrators and surviving assets, that his identity remained a secret even in death. The mission to erase his identity was successful. The granite was not merely anonymous. It was a final, secured communication to a hidden world. Price also confessed the immediate, urgent reason for the retrieval of the wallet at the hospital. He confirmed that the kind stranger had left a coded message in the wallet for the operative. This is why the shadow in the dark coat was so desperate to retrieve it quickly. The wallet was not just a container for the Swiss account number, his exit parachute. It was the dead drop for the operative's final information packet. The kind stranger knew his heroic act had exposed him, and he had minutes to send a final signal to his network before the local police began their slow, bureaucratic process of identification. The wallet contained not just his financial key, but the key to his network's current operational status, a final transmission sent moments before his death. I left the clandestine meeting, the cold, harsh facts cementing the truth. The man who saved me was a hero who died free of personal debt, but burdened by a final desperate duty to his network. The sacrifice was complete. His anonymity was his final act of loyalty. The time had come to decide how to handle this dangerous final knowledge. I had breached the cover-up, But the truth I carried was too heavy, too high stakes to share. The kind stranger had paid his debt and secured his network. Now, I had inherited the responsibility of keeping his final silence. The morning was cold, clear, and quiet. I returned to the cemetery, my footsteps crunching softly on the frozen ground. The immense truth, that the man beneath the earth was a phantom whose final heroic act had exposed his hidden life, and whose network paid a fortune to bury his name, was overwhelming. I stood before the headstone, the cold granite stark and final. The inscription, "Here lies a kind stranger, died saving a life," was no longer a source of suspicion. It was a complete, profound statement. It was a final protective lie paid for by the network he served, a necessary shield against exposure. The entire conspiracy, from the falsified police report to the bribed stone cutter, resolved into a single act of operational closure. The true burden was clear. I held the key to his identity, the scar, the tattoo, the Swiss account, and the key to his purpose, the network's need for silence. If I exposed his history, I risked endangering the very network he died protecting. I would be sabotaging his final, selfless duty. I reached my decision not with panic, but with the cold, deliberate logic I had inherited from the investigation itself. I chose to honor his sacrifice in the final protective lie. The man who saved my life deserved the peace he purchased with his life, and I owed him the silence he died to secure. I pulled out my phone and placed one final, encrypted call to Mr. Kessel, the Swiss finance consultant. I confirmed the transfer was complete, the funds secure. I issued my final definitive instructions. I demanded that all the multimillion-dollar funds be anonymously donated to a local charity that provided aid to uninsured accident victims, a subtle final tribute to his act of civilian heroism, utilizing the very financial parachute he had intended for himself. The money would complete his duty to the world. The silence would complete his duty to his network. The silence around the kind stranger was finally his true name. His history, his operational life, his network, all remained sealed in the granite and the suppressed digital files. My act ensured that the public record would never compromise his final mission. I looked at the stone. The question of how to live with this knowledge was the final, devastating inheritance. How will Clara live with the knowledge that the man who saved her life was not a man at all, but a beautiful, lethal secret? Embracing the vigil, Clara will live as the sole, silent custodian of the truth. She will not speak of the scar, the wallet, or the network. Her life, saved by his sacrifice, becomes a perpetual vigil of gratitude to his anonymity. Redefining humanity. She must reconcile the lethal secret, the operative, the scar, the paid debt, with the beautiful human act, the life saved, the anonymous death. She realizes that the man was human, defined not by the network he served, but by the one moment he chose compassion over procedure. His true name is not his cover, but kind stranger. A life of purpose. Her saved life now carries immense weight. She will dedicate her future actions to honoring the value of the life he chose to preserve, making her own life meaningful enough to justify the price he paid. The anonymous charity donation is the start of this new, purposeful existence. I knelt by the grave, touching the cold granite one last time. I felt no fear, only a profound, enduring gratitude and sorrow. The mystery was gone. The man was a ghost. I rose and walked away from the cedar's shadow, leaving the cemetery to its quiet, absolute peace. The final silence had been maintained. My life saved by a hero was now a long, complex secret I would carry forever. Did you enjoy the story? And from which city are you listening? Tell me in the comments. I always love hearing from you. If this story touched your heart, you can support me with a super thanks. Your support helps me continue creating more stories for you. 2 more beautiful life stories are on your screen right now. I hope you enjoy them too. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.